A first-class ticket, a tailored travel suit, and the color of her skin. For Dr. Alani Reed, one of these was apparently a problem for airport security. What happens when a man with a little bit of power tries to humiliate a woman who secretly holds all of it? He publicly accused her of forgery, threatened her with federal charges, and relished the spectacle as the entire terminal watched. He was confident, smug, and completely unaware that he was making the biggest mistake of his career. He never imagined the airline's CEO would come sprinting to the gate, bypass him completely, and address his victim with a single world-shattering word: boss. This is the story of how one vicious act of prejudice led to an epic and life-altering downfall. The air in the Aura, Airline's international first-class lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport, was a carefully curated symphony of calm. It hummed with the low murmur of discreet conversations, the soft clinking of porcelain on saucers, and the almost imperceptible hiss of an espresso machine. It was a sanctuary of hushed privilege, a bubble designed to insulate its inhabitants from the frantic, chaotic energy of the main terminal just beyond its frosted glass doors. This was a world of muted grays, warm woods, and the subtle, clean scent of white tea and bergamot. Dr. Alani Reed sat in a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, observing the ballet of aircraft on the tarmac below. A Boeing 777, its massive wings catching the afternoon sun, was being pushed back from its gate, beginning its long journey across the Atlantic. For a moment, she allowed herself a flicker of professional pride. Her company, Orion Holdings, had designed the lightweight composite materials used in those very wings materials that made the aircraft stronger, lighter, and more fuel-efficient. It was a secret satisfaction, a quiet connection to the marvel of engineering she was about to board. Alani was the embodiment of the lounge's aesthetic, elegant, understated, and powerful. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue cashmere travel suit, comfortable for the long flight to London, but sharp enough for a boardroom. Her only jewelry was a thin platinum watch on her wrist and a pair of simple diamond studs. Her hair was styled in neat, intricate braids that cascaded over her shoulder. On the small table beside her sat a leather briefcase containing documents for the Global Tech Summit she was to keynote, a cup of chamomile tea, and her boarding pass. The crisp, heavy paper stock read, "Reed Alani. Seat 1A. First class." She wasn't here to make a statement. She was here to travel to work to bridge continents as she had done 100 times before. She was 42 years old, the founder and chairwoman of Orion Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar technology and investment firm that had just 8 months prior completed a hostile takeover of the financially struggling Global Air Alliance, which included Aura Airlines. The acquisition had been brutal swift, and the subject of intense speculation in the financial world. Alani, who preferred to operate from the shadows and let her results speak for themselves, had become an unwilling subject of fascination. Forbes had dubbed her the ghost of Silicon Valley, a quiet force who reshaped industries without ever seeking the spotlight. The irony was most of the people who worked for the companies she now owned wouldn't recognize her if she sat next to them. And that was precisely how she liked it. Power, she believed, was most effective when it was unseen, a gravitational force rather than a battering ram. A polite, pre-recorded announcement chimed through the lounge, its voice smooth as silk. Aura Airlines is pleased to announce the commencement of boarding for Flight 7114 to London Heathrow at Gate B42. We now invite our first-class passengers and Aura Elite Diamond members to begin boarding at their convenience. Alani took a final calming sip of her tea. She gathered her briefcase, slipped her phone into her pocket, and picked up her boarding pass. She offered a warm, quiet smile to the lounge attendant, who nodded respectfully as she exited. The transition from the serene lounge to the bustling concourse was always a minor jolt. The low hum was replaced by a cacophony of rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, and 1,000 overlapping conversations in a dozen languages. Gate B42 was a hive of activity. Families were trying to corral excited children. Business travelers were firing off last-minute emails, and a long queue for economy boarding was already snaking down the hall. The priority boarding lane, designated by a plush red rope, was much shorter. Alani fell in line behind a family of 3 and ahead of an older gentleman engrossed in his newspaper. The process was orderly efficient. The gate agent, a woman named Brenda, with a professional but weary smile, scanned the family's passes with a cheerful beep and waved them through. It was Alani's turn. She stepped forward and handed her passport and boarding pass to Brenda. "Good afternoon," Alani said, her voice calm and even. Brenda smiled back. "Good afternoon, Dr. Reed. Have a wonderful flight." She placed the boarding pass on the scanner, but instead of the familiar welcoming beep, the scanner emitted a harsh, discordant buzz. A bright red X flashed on Brenda's screen. She frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, and tried again. "Buzz!" The red X glared back at them. "That's odd," Brenda murmured, typing something into her keyboard. "Let me just check this manually." It was at that moment that a figure stepped forward from the side, moving with a self-important stride. He was a Transportation Security Administration officer, but he carried himself with the air of a 4-star general. His name tag read, K. Miller. He was a man of average height, with a stocky build, a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer, and eyes that constantly swept the area not for threats, but for opportunities to assert his authority. "Problem here, Brenda?" he asked, his voice a gravelly baritone that was a little too loud for the space. He didn't look at Brenda. His eyes were already fixed on Alani, a slow, dismissive appraisal that traveled from her braided hair down to her simple, elegant flats. "Just a little scanner issue, Officer Miller," Brenda replied, still focused on her screen. "The system isn't recognizing the sequence. I'm sure it's just a glitch." Miller reached across the counter and plucked the boarding pass from Brenda's hand, ignoring her protest. He held it up, examining it with theatrical scrutiny. "Read Alani, seat 1A," he read aloud, his tone dripping with a theatrical sort of disbelief. He looked back at Alani, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "First class, huh? All the way at the front of the plane." Alani met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She kept her hands resting calmly on the handle of her briefcase. "Yes," she said simply. "Is there an issue, officer?" Miller let out a short, derisive huff. He tapped the boarding pass with a thick finger. "The issue, ma'am," he began, drawing out the last word with condescending emphasis, "is that our very expensive state-of-the-art system is telling me this piece of paper isn't valid. And when the system says something, I tend to listen." The quiet ascent to her flight was over. A storm was gathering, and Officer Kevin Miller was its gleeful, self-appointed architect. He saw a black woman in a first-class line with a ticket his scanner didn't like, and in the small, cramped world of his biases, the equation had already been solved. She didn't belong here. The atmosphere around Gate B42 shifted. The low thrum of boarding activity began to stutter as people in the nearby queues paused, their attention drawn to the escalating tension at the first-class podium. A scene was beginning to brew, and Officer Miller was its eager conductor. "A glitch, you said," Brenda Miller continued, waving the ticket dismissively. He turned his full attention to Alani, his posture expanding as if to occupy more space to assert more dominance. Or maybe it's not a glitch. We see it all the time. People buy cheap economy tickets and then try to get clever, forge a fancy-looking pass, try to fast-talk their way on. They think we're stupid. Alani's composure remained intact, a mask of serene neutrality, but inside a familiar weariness washed over her. It was an emotion she knew well, the exhaustion that came from having to constantly prove her existence, her right to occupy spaces she had more than earned. "Officer," she said, her voice still level, betraying none of the simmering frustration, "I can assure you the ticket is perfectly legitimate. It was booked through my corporate travel department the same way it has been for the last 15 years. Perhaps you could check the passenger manifest against my passport." She gestured to the open passport still lying on the counter, her U.S. citizenship, and her face in the photo clear for all to see. Miller glanced at the passport, but didn't pick it up. It was as if acknowledging its validity would weaken his position. "Your corporate travel department?" He scoffed, the air quotes in his voice practically visible. "Right. Look, I don't have time for stories. The scanner says no. That means no." Brenda, the gate agent, finally found her voice, though it was timid. "Officer, I can call the ticketing desk. They can verify the PNR in seconds. It's likely a system sync issue since the merger. We've had a few of these." "I'll handle this," Miller snapped, cutting her off with a sharp look that sent her shrinking back behind her monitor. He had his target, and he wasn't about to be deterred by facts or procedure. He was on a power trip, and Alani was the vehicle. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet still performatively loud whisper. "Let me give you some friendly advice. You can admit you made a mistake right now, go back to the main terminal, and we can all forget this happened. You push this, and we're going to be talking about a whole lot more than a missed flight. We'll be talking about fraud, forgery of travel documents. That's a federal offense." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. Several people in the queue behind Alani exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young woman with a laptop bag, who looked like a law student, shifted on her feet, her brow furrowed with concern. Further back, a portly man in a wrinkled suit. Mr. Henderson huffed impatiently. "Can we get this moving? Some of us have connections to make." Alani ignored the impatient man. She focused solely on Miller. The condescension, the baseless accusation, the public humiliation, it was a pattern as old as time, just wearing a new uniform. She could have ended it right there, a single phone call, a name dropped. But something in her refused. Why should she have to reveal her identity, her power, just to be treated with basic human dignity? The principle of the matter began to solidify into a hard, cold resolve in her gut. She would play this by the rules even if he refused to. "Officer Miller," she said, her tone taking on a new crystalline firmness, "I will not be admitting to a mistake I haven't made. I am a paying passenger with a valid ticket for Seat 1A on this flight. I am asking you to follow standard procedure and verify my ticket through the airline's manifest. If you refuse to do so, I will ask for your supervisor." This was not the reaction he had expected. He had anticipated tears or angry shouting or a flustered retreat. This calm, unyielding insistence on procedure seemed to enrage him. It was a direct challenge to his authority, and his face began to flush a deep mottled red. "Oh, you're asking for my supervisor now," he sneered. "You think that's going to scare me? You're in my world here, lady. And in my world, people who carry fake documents don't get to make demands." With a sudden aggressive movement, he took the boarding pass and tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was shockingly loud in the relative quiet of the moment. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Brenda's eyes went wide with horror. "There," Miller said, tossing the 2 pieces of the ticket onto the counter like garbage. "Now it's officially invalid. Now you have no ticket." He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at her. "And now you are officially being denied boarding. I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the line and come with me." The act was so blatant, so far beyond any reasonable protocol, that it stunned the crowd into silence. Tearing a passenger's boarding pass was not just unprofessional, it was an act of overt aggression. He was no longer a security officer. He was a bully on a stage of his own making. The young law student behind Alani finally spoke up. "Excuse me, officer, you can't do that. You have no authority to destroy airline property or invalidate a travel document without verification. That's way outside TSA protocol." Miller swiveled his head to glare at her. "You want to get involved in this, little girl? You want me to start asking for your papers, too? Mind your own business." The woman paled slightly but held her ground. "I know my rights, and I know you're abusing your authority." Ignoring her, Miller turned back to Alani, his expression triumphant and cruel. "Last chance. Are you coming peacefully, or do I have to detain you for causing a disturbance?" The humiliation was complete. She was being accused of a crime, her property was destroyed, and she was being threatened with arrest in front of hundreds of strangers. The cold resolve in her stomach hardened into ice. She had tried to be reasonable. She had tried to de-escalate. She had tried to believe in the system. The system in the form of Kevin Miller had spat in her face. Slowly, deliberately, Alani reached into her travel suit's inner pocket and retrieved her phone. Her movements were fluid and unhurried, a stark contrast to Miller's agitated energy. "What do you think you're doing?" Miller barked, his hand instinctively moving toward the taser on his belt. "You are not allowed to record me." Alani didn't raise the phone to record. She simply unlocked it with her thumb, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not recording you, officer," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I am making a phone call. You have refused to do your job. You have refused to call your supervisor. So I'm going to call mine." Miller laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're going to call your supervisor? Who are you going to call? Your corporate travel department again. Good luck with that." Alani navigated to her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name. Julian Vance, CEO, Aura Airlines. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but Officer Miller had not just crossed a line. He had shredded it. He had made this personal, and in doing so, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. She pressed the call button. She didn't need to say a word when the call connected. A single pre-arranged text message had already been sent to that same number 10 minutes ago when the situation first began, code red, JFK, Gate B42. The phone call was just the final confirmation. Help was already on the way. The call connected almost instantly. Alani didn't raise the phone to her ear. She simply held it in her hand, the screen lit up, and looked directly at Officer Miller. She didn't need to speak. The message had been sent. The clock was now ticking. Miller, misinterpreting her silence as a failed, desperate bluff, grew even bolder. His chest puffed out, and he reveled in what he perceived as his total victory. "Whoops, looks like your supervisor isn't picking up," he taunted, a venomous grin spreading across his face. "Guess you're all out of options. Now are you going to step aside, or am I going to have to physically remove you?" The standoff had brought the entire boarding process to a grinding halt. The line for first class was now backed up, its well-heeled passengers murmuring in discontent. Mr. Henderson, the impatient businessman, was now loudly complaining to anyone who would listen. "This is outrageous. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I pay thousands for this service, not to stand here and watch this theater." Brenda, the gate agent, looked utterly lost. She was caught between airline procedure, which dictated she help the passenger, and the intimidating presence of a TSA officer who was clearly operating on his own twisted agenda. She wrung her hands, her eyes darting between Alani and Miller, a picture of helpless anxiety. Alani stood her ground, a solitary island of calm, in a sea of rising chaos. "I will not be moving." she stated, her voice resonating with an authority that seemed to come from a source deeper than the situation warranted. "I will stand here until this is resolved correctly. You have destroyed my boarding pass. You have threatened me. You have refused to follow protocol. I am now waiting for someone who will." Miller's face contorted with fury. He had expected her to crumble, but she was as unmovable as granite. This defiance in front of his audience was intolerable. "That's it. You're causing a public disturbance. You're interfering with airport security operations." He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller at Gate B42 Concourse B. I have a disruptive individual refusing to comply, requesting backup for removal." The word backup sent a fresh wave of alarm through the crowd. This was no longer just an argument. It was a security incident. People instinctively took a step back, creating a wider circle around Alani and Miller, as if an invisible wall had sprung up. The young law student Sarah Jenkins had her phone out now, not recording overtly, but holding it in a way that captured the scene. She was documenting this, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Alani watched Miller, her gaze analytical and cold. She was no longer seeing him as a person. He was a data point, a case study in systemic failure. He was the embodiment of the rot she had been tasked with cleaning out since her acquisition of the airline. He was unprofessional, biased, and a liability of catastrophic proportions. In her mind, she was already drafting the policy changes, the new training modules, the corporate overhaul his actions were making so painfully necessary. "Backup is on the way," Miller announced, smugly clipping the radio back to his shoulder. "You've made a very, very big mistake." A tense silence descended upon the gate. The only sounds were the distant, muffled announcements for other flights, and the irate muttering of Mr. Henderson. The two other gate agents had frozen, watching the drama unfold, too intimidated to intervene. For a few agonizing minutes, it felt like a siege. Alani was surrounded not by friends or allies, but by a circle of strangers, a hostile officer, and the crushing weight of public judgment. She felt the stares, the whispers, the mix of pity, scorn, and morbid curiosity. It was in these moments of intense pressure that Alani's true nature shone. Where others saw a crisis, she saw an opportunity to gather data on how the system fails at its most basic level. She noted Brenda's fear, Miller's unchecked aggression, the passengers' reluctance to get involved, and the one young woman, Sarah, who had the courage to speak up. All of it was being filed away in her formidable memory. Then a new sound cut through the tension. It wasn't the sound of more security. It was the frantic squeaking of expensive dress shoes on polished linoleum, moving at a speed that was closer to a run than a walk. Heads turned toward the end of the concourse. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit was weaving through the crowds with a desperate urgency. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a silver-streaked quiff of hair that looked slightly disheveled from his sprint. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a sort of controlled panic. People in the terminal who recognized him did a double-take. He wasn't just some airport executive. He was a face they'd seen in financial news in airline magazines. As he got closer, his eyes scanned the scene at the gate, finally locking on to the tableau, Officer Miller standing triumphantly over Alani, the torn boarding pass on the counter, the circle of stunned onlookers. A look of pure, unadulterated horror washed over his features. Officer Miller saw him coming. He straightened up, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He assumed this was a high-level airport manager, perhaps even an airline executive coming to support his decision and commend him for his vigilance. He prepared to give his report to paint himself as the hero who had stopped a potential fraudster. The man in the suit, Julian Vance, CEO of Aura Airlines, didn't even glance at him. He ran the last few feet, his focus entirely singularly on the calm woman in the navy blue travel suit. He skidded to a halt in front of the podium, breathing heavily, his tie slightly askew. He bypassed Officer Miller as if he were a piece of furniture. He ignored the stares of the passengers. He walked directly to Alani, his expression a frantic mix of apology deference and profound stress. He stopped a foot in front of her, smoothed his suit jacket, and inclined his head in a gesture of deep respect. "Dr. Reed," Julian Vance gasped, his voice still catching his breath. "My sincerest apologies. I came as soon as I got your message. Please forgive the delay. The traffic was unbelievable." The entire gate area fell into a deafening silence. The change in the power dynamic was so sudden, so absolute, that it felt like the laws of physics had momentarily been suspended. Officer Miller's smug expression froze, then slowly began to melt like wax, replaced by a slack-jawed, vacant look of utter confusion. He stared at the impeccably dressed CEO, then back at the woman he had just been threatening to arrest. The pieces weren't just not fitting. They were from two completely different puzzles. Julian Vance, still ignoring Miller, continued speaking to Alani in a low, urgent tone. "Is everything all right? Are you harmed?" The message just said, "Code Red. I've already got our entire executive security team en route." Alani finally allowed a small, tight smile to touch her lips. It didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold as steel. "Everything is fine, Julian. For me, at least." She tilted her head slightly, her gaze flicking for the first time toward the now petrified TSA officer. "I was just being informed by Officer Miller here that my ticket is fraudulent and that I was to be detained for causing a disturbance." Julian Vance slowly turned his head, and for the first time he fixed his gaze on Officer Kevin Miller. The look in the CEO's eyes was not angry. It was something far worse. It was a look of cold, surgical fury, the look a man gives to something he is about to utterly and completely dismantle. The siege of Gate B42 was over. The trial of Officer Miller was about to begin. The silence that had fallen over Gate B42 was now so profound it seemed to have a physical weight. Mr. Henderson's complaints died in his throat. Sarah Jenkins, the law student, lowered her phone slightly, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Brenda, the gate agent, looked as if she'd seen a ghost. And Officer Kevin Miller. Officer Miller looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was not solid ground at all, but a trap door, and someone had just pulled the lever. "What?" Julian Vance asked, his voice dangerously soft. He turned his body fully to face Miller, who seemed to visibly shrink under the CEO's glacial stare. This woman," Miller stammered, his bravado evaporating into a cloud of panicked sweat that beaded on his forehead. He pointed a trembling finger at Alani. "Her ticket. The scanner rejected it. It's a fake. I was following protocol." Julian's eyes narrowed into slits. "Protocol," he repeated the word, dripping with contempt. "You think protocol involves humiliating a passenger, tearing up her boarding pass?" He gestured to the two pieces of paper on the counter. "You think protocol is threatening to arrest the single most important person to fly on this airline or any airline in our alliance this year?" Miller's face went from pale to ashen. The words weren't computing. "Most important person. What? What are you talking about? Who is she?" "Julian." Vance took a half step closer, lowering his voice so that it carried only to those in the immediate vicinity, which somehow made it more menacing. "You're standing there in a uniform with a logo of an airline you clearly know nothing about. You work in a terminal that serves a carrier whose leadership you can't identify. Let me educate you." He turned slightly to address not just Miller, but everyone within earshot, the other agents, the gaping passengers, the entire frozen audience. His voice rose, taking on the clear, commanding tone of a CEO addressing his shareholders. "This is Dr. Alani Reed," he announced, his hand gesturing toward her with a reverence that bordered on fealty. "Dr. Reed is an MIT-trained aerospace engineer, a pioneer in composite material science, and the founder and chairwoman of Orion Holdings." He paused, letting the name of the company hang in the air. For those in the financial or tech world like Mr. Henderson, the name landed like a physical blow. Orion Holdings was a behemoth, a titan of industry known for its aggressive, transformative acquisitions. Julian let the realization sink in before delivering the final devastating sentence. Orion Holdings, he said, his eyes boring into Miller's, is the parent company that completed its acquisition of Aura Airlines 8 months ago. Dr. Reed doesn't just fly on this airline. She owns this airline. She owns the plane you're standing next to. She owns the seat you denied her. She owns the uniforms on the backs of these gate agents. And by extension, Officer Miller, she is, for all intents and purposes, your boss's boss's boss. So when I see her, I don't just see a first-class passenger. I see the woman who signs my paycheck. I see the boss. A collective audible gasp went through the crowd. Mr. Henderson, who had been loudly complaining about the delay, looked as if he might faint. He sank back against a post, his face a mask of horrified recognition. Sarah Jenkins's mouth formed a silent O of astonishment. She now understood the source of Alani's incredible poise. It wasn't just dignity, it was the supreme confidence of a person who held all the cards. The full weight of the revelation crashed down upon Kevin Miller. His entire reality reconfigured itself in a single horrifying instant. The woman he had belittled, threatened, and publicly humiliated wasn't just some random traveler trying to scam her way into a better seat. She was the apex predator of the entire corporate ecosystem in which he was a bottom feeder. He had not just provoked a lioness. He had done it while his head was squarely in its mouth. His legs felt weak. The sneer, the confidence, the power, it all dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, pathetic man. I didn't know. He whispered the words, barely audible. Nobody told me. I was just doing my job. Your job, Alani spoke for the first time since Julian's arrival. Her voice was devoid of heat, as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Your job, Officer Miller, is to ensure the safety and security of passengers. Your job is not to be the arbiter of who you think belongs in a first-class line. Your job is not to indulge your personal prejudices on company time. You failed at your job on every conceivable level. She then turned her attention to Julian, her expression shifting from icy condemnation to professional command. Julian, the scanner issue. Why did it happen? Julian jolted back into CEO mode, turned to the terrified Brenda. Brenda, the ticket! What was the error code on the screen? Brenda, her voice trembling, read from her monitor. It was a PNR desync, sir. It says passenger record mismatch, cross-system flag. We've seen it a few times since the data migration from the old GDS to the new Orion-based system. Julian's face tightened. So this was a known technical issue related to the acquisition? Yes, sir, Brenda squeaked. The memo said if it happens, we're supposed to manually verify the passenger manifest and reissue the ticket at the gate. The information landed with sickening finality. Not only had Miller been wrong, but the initial problem was a minor known glitch with a simple established procedure to fix it. A procedure he had actively prevented Brenda from following. Alani nodded slowly, a grim understanding on her face. So he had a choice between a 5-second procedural check and a 20-minute public spectacle of baseless accusation. And he chose the spectacle. The unraveling was complete. Every justification Miller could possibly have had was stripped away, exposing the raw, ugly prejudice that had been his only motivation. He had no protocol to hide behind, no system error to blame. There was only his actions now laid bare for everyone to see. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. He just stood there, a man utterly broken by his own bigotry, as 2 senior TSA supervisors, alerted by Julian's team, arrived at the gate. They were accompanied by 2 Port Authority police officers. They weren't backup for Miller. They were his escort. One of the supervisors, a man with a weary face named Davies, took in the scene, the CEO, the torn ticket, Miller's ghost-white face. He sighed a sound of profound, bureaucratic exhaustion. "Miller," Supervisor Davies said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Come with us. Now." Kevin Miller didn't resist. He couldn't even make eye contact with anyone. He looked at the floor at his own shoes as if seeing them for the first time. He was no longer a man in power. He was a man in custody being led away from the gate, past the silent, staring passengers who had been the audience for his rise and his spectacular fall. His career wasn't just over. It had been publicly and comprehensively annihilated. As Officer Miller was escorted away, a palpable sense of release washed over the gate area. The oppressive tension he had created dissipated, replaced by a flurry of nervous energy and frantic, quiet activity. The tides of power had not just shifted. They had reversed with the force of a tsunami, and now everyone was scrambling to find their footing on the new shore. Supervisor Davies approached Alani and Julian Vance, his expression grim and apologetic. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Vance, on behalf of the Transportation Security Administration, I want to offer our deepest, most sincere apologies for the absolutely unacceptable behavior of Officer Miller. What you experienced today is not a reflection of our standards, our training, or our values. It was a failure on every level." Alani met his gaze. "I appreciate that, Supervisor. But with all due respect, what I experienced today suggests that for at least one of your officers, it is exactly a reflection of his standards and values. My concern is how many more like him are currently on duty." Davies winced, recognizing the undeniable truth in her words. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. A full and immediate investigation is being launched. I can assure you his employment is terminated effective immediately, and we will be using this incident as a catalyst to review our entire JFK-based de-escalation and bias training. We will do better." "I expect nothing less," Alani said coolly. Julian Vance, now fully in control, turned to Brenda, his tone softening from commanding to reassuring. "Brenda, thank you. You tried to do the right thing. Please reissue Dr. Reed's boarding pass for Seat 1A immediately. And please take a $5,000 flight credit for your trouble. Your professionalism under pressure is noted." Brenda, who had been on the verge of tears, looked up in stunned gratitude. She quickly typed on her keyboard, and the small printer beside her whirred to life, producing a new, pristine boarding pass. She handed it to Alani with a trembling hand. "Here you are, Dr. Reed. And thank you, sir. Thank you." Julian then turned his attention to the queue of first-class passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal. His voice once again became the smooth, polished instrument of a CEO. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Airlines, I apologize for the delay and for the distressing scene you were all forced to witness. This is not the standard of service or safety we aim to provide. As a gesture of our apology, every passenger on this flight in every class will be receiving a 25,000-mile bonus credit to their accounts. Our ground staff will be processing this now. We will now resume boarding immediately. Thank you for your patience. A ripple of surprised murmurs went through the crowd. Mr. Henderson, the formerly irate businessman, now looked deeply ashamed. He approached Alani hesitantly, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Dr. Reed," he began, his voice low, I just want to apologize for my impatience. I was out of line. I had no idea." Alani looked at him, her expression softening for the first time. She saw not malice in him, but the casual entitlement of a frequent traveler who had forgotten his manners. "Apology accepted, Mr. Henderson," she said simply. "A little patience and a little grace go a long way for everyone." He nodded, humbled, and shuffled toward the jet bridge. Then a final piece of the scene needed addressing. Alani's eyes scanned the crowd and found the young woman who had spoken up for her. Sarah Jenkins was still standing there, looking both vindicated and slightly starstruck. Alani walked over to her. "Excuse me," Alani said, her voice warm. "I didn't get a chance to thank you." Sarah blinked, surprised to be addressed directly. "Oh, you don't need to thank me. He was being a monster. I'm a third-year law student. We study civil rights and abuse of authority. Seeing it happen right in front of me, I couldn't just stand there." "Most people did," Alani pointed out gently. "You didn't. You showed courage and you spoke up for a stranger. That's a rare quality." She extended her hand. "Alani Reed?" "Sarah Jenkins," the student replied, shaking her hand firmly. "It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Reed. I've read about Orion's acquisition. It's required reading in my corporate law class." A genuine smile finally graced Alani's face. "Well, perhaps we can discuss it further. My chief counsel is looking for summer interns with a strong moral compass. I'd like my office to send you some information." She pulled a sleek black business card from her briefcase. "Send your resume to this email address. I'll make sure it gets to the right place." Sarah stared at the card as if it were solid gold. Her eyes welled up. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much." "Thank you, Ms. Jenkins," Alani corrected her. "The world needs more lawyers like you." With the loose ends tied up, Julian escorted Alani down the jet bridge. As they walked, the hum of the aircraft's ventilation system enveloped them. "I am so sorry, Alani," Julian said again, his voice strained. "This is a nightmare, a complete failure of our customer-facing protocols." "It's more than that, Julian," she said, her voice serious again. "It's a symptom of a deeper disease. This isn't about one bad apple." Miller felt comfortable doing what he did because the environment allowed for it. He felt empowered. That's what we have to change. They reached the aircraft door, where the flight attendants stood ready, their smiles a little strained, having heard whispers of the drama outside. The purser, a distinguished older woman, greeted them. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reed, Mr. Vance. We are honored to have you." "I'm not flying today, Maria," Julian said. "I'm just ensuring Dr. Reed gets settled. Please give her your full attention." He walked her to her seat, 1A, a spacious pod, at the very front of the cabin. He helped her place her briefcase in the overhead bin before turning to her one last time. "We will fix this," he promised, his voice low and intense. "The training, the protocols, the culture. I'll start tomorrow. You have my word." "I know you will, Julian," Alani replied, finally taking her seat. "And I'll be expecting a full report on my desk by Monday." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. He nodded, gave a final respectful bow, and walked off the plane. As Alani settled into her seat, the flight attendant approached with a glass of champagne. "Dr. Reed, may I get you anything before takeoff?" Alani looked out the window at the scurrying ground crew, at the vast and complex world of the airport. The tides had shifted, the immediate threat was gone, and she had won. But the victory felt hollow. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. "Just some water, please," she said. "And a notepad. I have some work to do." The transatlantic flight to London was 7 hours of focused, uninterrupted work. While other first-class passengers settled in with movies, champagne, and multi-course meals, Alani Reed transformed her private suite into a command center. The notepad the purser had given her was quickly filled with meticulously structured notes, flowcharts, and action items. She connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, her fingers flying across the keyboard of her laptop, sending encrypted emails to her executive team, her chief counsel, and the head of human resources for Orion Holdings. Karma in Alani's world was not a mystical force. It was a well-funded, data-driven, and ruthlessly efficient corporate initiative. Her first set of directives was to Julian Vance. She demanded a top-to-bottom audit of all third-party security contractors and federally employed personnel at every hub airport Aura Airlines serviced. She wanted incident reports, passenger complaints, and commendations analyzed for patterns of behavior. A new zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct was to be drafted and implemented within 60 days with clear, non-negotiable consequences, including immediate termination and potential civil action. Her second set of directives went to her legal team. They were to immediately file a formal complaint with the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA against Kevin Miller, not just for his unprofessional conduct, but for civil rights violations. Furthermore, they were to reach out to Sarah Jenkins, the law student, not just with an internship offer, but with a full scholarship for her final year of law school, funded by a new Orion Holdings Courage in the Community grant. Alani believed in rewarding allies as decisively as she punished adversaries. Her third set of directives was for her own company's HR and DEI diversity, equity, and inclusion departments. She commissioned the development of a new immersive training program codenamed Project Aura. It wouldn't be the usual box-ticking hour-long webinar on unconscious bias. It would be a mandatory multi-day seminar for all customer-facing employees and managers using virtual reality simulations of difficult passenger interactions taught by leading sociologists and de-escalation experts. The goal was not just to teach rules, but to fundamentally reshape the corporate culture from one of passive tolerance to one of active advocacy for its passengers. By the time the plane began its descent into the misty skies over London, Alani had laid the groundwork for a corporate revolution. The incident with Miller was no longer just a personal insult. It was the catalyst, the data point, that justified the sweeping systemic changes she had known for months were necessary. Meanwhile, back in New York, Kevin Miller's world was crumbling with astonishing speed. Being escorted out of the terminal was just the beginning. At the TSA administrative offices at JFK, he was met not with sympathy, but with cold, bureaucratic fury. Supervisor Davies had already briefed the station chief. Miller's badge and credentials were confiscated. He was placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending an investigation that everyone knew was a mere formality. He tried to defend himself, his voice cracking with desperation. "I was just being vigilant. The ticket was flagged. I thought she was a security risk." The station chief, a stern woman, who had seen every excuse imaginable, just shook her head. You had a direct, procedural solution to a known IT glitch, and you ignored it. You chose to escalate, to humiliate, and to threaten. You did this in front of the CEO and the owner of the airline. What you thought is irrelevant, Miller. What you did is indefensible. Pack up your locker. You're done here. When he arrived home that evening, the story was already spreading like wildfire through the tight-knit community of airport workers. His phone buzzed with messages, some curious, some contemptuous. His wife, who had heard a garbled version from a friend who worked for an airport concession stand, demanded to know what happened. As he recounted his version, the story of a vigilant officer being railroaded by a powerful, arrogant woman, he could see the doubt in her eyes. The next day, the official termination letter arrived by courier. But that was only the start. 2 days later, a formidable-looking lawyer from Orion Holdings legal firm served him with a notice of intent to sue for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit wasn't really about money. It was about ensuring Miller's actions would be a permanent public record, a cautionary tale for anyone else who might feel tempted to abuse their power. It was also designed to bury him in legal fees, a slow, grinding form of financial karma. He tried to find another job in security, but the world is small. The JFK Gate B-42 incident became a whispered legend among airport staff nationwide. No private security firm would touch him. He was a walking liability. Within a month, he was forced to sell his car. Within 3 months, the strain of unemployment and the impending lawsuit shattered his marriage. His wife left, taking the children with her. Kevin Miller, the man who had briefly felt like a king in his small kingdom at the boarding gate, was now a pariah. He had lost his job, his reputation, his family, and his future. His act of calculated cruelty born from a moment of petty prejudice had resulted in the complete and utter demolition of his life. He had sought to humiliate a woman he believed was powerless, only to discover his own profound insignificance in the face of true institutional power wielded with surgical precision. 6 months after the incident at Gate B-42, the corporate headquarters of Aura Airlines felt like a different company. The changes Alani Reed had set in motion had cascaded through every level of the organization, a powerful ripple effect from a single stone dropped in the water. Project Aura, the immersive new training program, was now mandatory for all 40,000 employees of the airline, from baggage handlers to pilots. It was a massive, expensive undertaking, but Alani had approved the budget without blinking. The initial sessions were already yielding results. Anonymous employee surveys showed a marked increase in feelings of empowerment and a clearer understanding of de-escalation and passenger advocacy. The number of formal passenger complaints related to discriminatory behavior had dropped by 70% across the entire network. Julian Vance, galvanized by the incident, had taken on the mission with the fervor of a convert. He personally attended a dozen of the training sessions, sitting not as the CEO, but as just another employee listening and learning. His relationship with Alani had deepened, evolving from one of employee-owner to one of trusted partners with a shared vision. He understood now that her focus wasn't just on profit margins and stock prices, but on building a resilient, ethical, and respectable organization from the inside out. At a law school in New York, Sarah Jenkins was finishing her final year at the top of her class, her tuition fully paid by the Orion Holdings grant. She had accepted the internship offer and had spent her summer working directly with Alani's chief counsel. She had proven to be as brilliant as she was brave, and a full-time job offer was already waiting for her upon graduation. Her single act of courage had altered the trajectory of her entire life. Brenda, the gate agent, had been promoted to a station supervisor role. Her calm handling of the initial scanner problem and her attempt to follow procedure had been noted on her record by Julian himself. She was now in a position to train new gate agents, her personal story serving as a powerful lesson in the importance of sticking to procedure and prioritizing passenger dignity even under pressure. And what of Kevin Miller? His life had continued its downward spiral. The lawsuit from Orion Holdings was ongoing, a relentless drain on his finances and his spirit. Unable to find work in security, he was now working nights stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store, a job that offered him anonymity and no authority whatsoever. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the memory of a single afternoon when his worst instincts had been given free rein. He sometimes saw Airline's planes flying overhead and would feel a bitter, hollow ache in his chest, a reminder of the world he had been so violently ejected from. The story of the incident at Gate B42 had become something of an urban legend within the company, a teaching tool used in training, and a quiet warning whispered among employees. It served as a stark, undeniable example of what happens when prejudice meets power. It wasn't the sanitized hypothetical scenarios of old training manuals. It was a real story with real people and real life-altering consequences. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alani Reed was back at JFK this time, in the newly redesigned and rebranded Orion Lounge. She was flying to Tokyo for another conference. As she walked to her gate, she saw a young black family struggling with their luggage and a crying toddler. One of the new Aura passenger advocates, a role created by Project Aura, immediately left her post to help them, calming the child with a small toy airplane and helping the parents consolidate their bags. The interaction was kind, respectful, and efficient. Alani watched for a moment, a rare, genuine smile on her face. This was the result. This was the real victory. It wasn't about the downfall of one angry, prejudiced man. It was about building a system where a man like that could no longer thrive. It was about creating countless small moments of kindness and professionalism that, taken together, would rebuild the soul of the company she owned. She boarded her flight, took her seat in 1A without incident, and as the plane powerfully ascended into the sky, she felt a sense of profound and satisfying peace. The world below was still imperfect, but she had used her power not just to punish an injustice, but to build a better, fairer corner of it. And that she knew was the only kind of karma that truly mattered. Kevin Miller's story is a stark and powerful reminder that prejudice and the abuse of power, no matter how small the stage, can have devastating and life-altering consequences. It shows us that in our interconnected world, you never truly know who you're talking to. But the real lesson here isn't just about his epic downfall. It's about what Dr. Alani Reed did next. She didn't just get an apology or seek personal revenge. She used her immense power to enact real systemic change, ensuring that the humiliation she faced would be far less likely to happen to anyone else. Her actions prove that true strength isn't just about wealth or status, but about using your influence to create a more just and equitable world. If this story resonated with you, and you believe that accountability, integrity, and using power for good are values worth celebrating, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true stories where karma isn't just a concept, but a reality. Let us know in the comments, what do you think was the most satisfying part of this story? Thanks for listening.